So hi, I'm Chloe, and I'm the Vice President of the Liverpool Guild of Students. And I'll be chairing this panel where we're going to be introducing you to a number of different topics relating to women's experiences in Liverpool and as students. We have some amazing women here to discuss the topics. They'll introduce themselves a bit later. And my fellow student officer, Imogen, the Deputy President, is here. Where she'll be taking questions and answers from the audience. It also must be noted that sensitive issues will be discussed during these conversations, also including sexual misconduct and consent. And we have a private, separate Zoom call with one of our guild advisors if you need any support during the event, or if you want any further support afterwards and you're watching this recording, you can email the advice team at guildadvice@liverpool.ac.uk. So if everyone wants to introduce themselves, just to say what group you're part of, what role or what is your role, and also just add in, like, do you consider yourself an activist? So I'll start with Sue Jackson.
Hello, my name's Sue Jackson and I'm from RASA Merseyside. RASA stands for Rape and Sexual Abuse Service in Merseyside. And I'm primarily a counsellor there, and I used to do quite a lot of assessments as well, and that's part of our general counselling role now. So we make sure people are okay for counselling, and we support them through the criminal justice system as well. And yeah, I would definitely say that I was an activist, sort of privately, in my own life, outside of work, and in work as well.
And Micaela, do you want to just introduce yourself, and do you consider yourself an activist?
Hi, I'm Micaela. I'm a student. I'm also chair of this new society at Liverpool called Draw the Line. It's a society that's been set up to campaign against sexual violence on campus, and also be a space for survivors and amplify the voices of survivors on campus. And I do consider myself an activist as well.
Sally, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Thanks, Chloe, and thanks for inviting me to take part in today's panel. So my name's Sally Middleton. I'm the Gender Equality Officer at the University of Liverpool, and I've worked in that role since about 2015, but I've worked at the university for quite a lot longer. My role's pretty broad in scope, and I find myself getting involved in a huge variety of pieces of work across the university, and I'll touch upon some of those later in our conversation. I'm based in the university's diversity and equality team, and that's really important because I think it's vital that gender equality isn't considered in a vacuum, and we obviously intersect with lots of other areas of equality, and it's really important that I get to work with those colleagues and then also lots of other departments across the university to try and tackle some of these issues. I definitely consider myself an active feminist and personally an activist. I don't know if I'm necessarily an activist in my job.
Great. And Lucy, do you want to introduce yourself and if you consider yourself an activist?
Hi, so I'm Lucy. I'm part of Liverpool Sisterhood, which is it's a local group, and we organised for the past couple of years the International Women's Day marches. I would consider myself an activist, I am aware at the same time that I'm always continuously learning and I can do better. So I'm mixed about it, whether I identify or not.
Great, thank you guys. So following on, like Lucy, what you were saying about your activism and if you consider yourself an activist, would you say your experiences as a woman has affected the activism that you might take part in, or your beliefs in, you know, women's equality, women's issues? Would you say your experiences have affected those actions, and how have they affected it?
Yeah, so I think most importantly, I was a victim of domestic violence in a relationship at a very young age, and the lack of support or the lack of just kind of general awareness of my situation really did fuel my desire to be a part of a bigger movement and a bigger thing, to make sure that there was no other people that were going through what I went through at a young age. And just in general, everything, I think, as a woman, your experiences, you will have at some point have experienced a form of discrimination or sexism, and that for me comes out in everything I do, in the art that I make, in the things that I write, in the things that I produce, like everything. So yeah, I think definitely my experiences as a woman affect my activism.
Oh, that's really interesting. Micaela, would you say that your experiences have affected you as a woman and as a student, as an activist?
Definitely, in terms of like the activism that we're going to do this year, with Draw the Line, part of that obviously for me came from the fact that in my first year I was a victim of sexual violence on campus, which I think can really really badly affect your like uni experience and like completely change it. And so it's not really like spoken about enough, I don't think, on campus. So part of that was like part of the idea of Draw the Line is to really like sort of shout loud about it and make sure that people are aware that it happens, and just sort of an awareness campaign around it, because I think there's too many women, like we all know like a friend, or we all know someone, or we might have been through it ourselves, that has been like a victim of sexual violence, and especially at university, I think it's a really big issue. So that's that's obviously affected, you know, my reason and a few of my friends' reasons for trying to set up this society. I'm also like, outside of like being a student, I'm also like a labour and trade union activist as well, and a shop steward like in my workplace. And being a woman, and those experiences as well, being a young woman, has really like affected how I'm like an activist today. Like the amount of sexism that you come across like on a day-to-day basis when you're in those sort of circles is like quite high. It's a lot of like older men that think they know a lot better than you, so you're often like spoken over, and not really taken seriously as a young woman. But I think this has sort of made me more like resilient and determined and just better organized. Like I think as a young woman, like organizing, you have to do twice as much as a man to be recognized for the same amount of work. And so aside from that being really frustrating, it also pushes you to like, you know, work harder, and just I think it just makes you like more determined to like prove people wrong, really, and shout louder as well, and be really vocal in sort of what you believe in and what you think is right. So that's just what I've got to say about that.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to like transferring that anger into power, and, you know, putting it to some good use, because there's nothing else you can really do, to be honest. And just thinking about COVID and, you know, the whole exceptional circumstances that we're in right now, Lucy, you mentioned the kind of collectivism in the Liverpool Sisterhood. Do you think that's been impacted by COVID, and how do you continue to keep that going, like the women's rights marches? How do you continue keeping that kind of spirit during kind of COVID times?
Honestly, I think it's really affected our kind of productivity and output as a group. We've obviously, if this carries on for the next year, we'll struggle to organise any kind of march, because it wouldn't be responsible. Sorry if you can hear an ice cream van. It wouldn't be responsible on our part to like, we couldn't social distance at all, and that's just the nature of the march. So far we've been doing things on Zoom, which have been still as productive. It's just difficult to actually get out and do things, which is a lot of what our group is about. And obviously just before lockdown we had the Black Lives Matter movement, so as a group we're taking this time as a period of reflection. So we're really trying to put our efforts into educating ourselves, learning, doing more to kind of learn more about issues that we're not necessarily, you know, I think, and obviously I'm a white woman, so a lot of us are taking the time to educate ourselves on important issues. We haven't really got a plan as of yet for how we're going to carry on. I think we are just going to stick to Zoom where we can, do a lot of kind of social media work where we can, and just taking it day by day, really. It just doesn't help because there's so much that can be done, and I feel like a lot of people in society now are getting left behind, whether it's because of the restrictive measures, whether it's because they work in the hospitality sector, and it's frustrating that there's so much work we could do, but we're also challenged by the virus and not being able to interact with people.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's that point of reflection as well, the COVID times, and also a lot, like you said, a lot of people have been left behind. It's just such a shame that like physical kind of action can take place. So moving on to Sally, who works, you know, at the university, and you work a lot with Athena Swan. How would you just like to explain what that kind of group is, and kind of just expand on that, please?
Yeah, of course. So quite a lot of my role does work to sort of support the university's Athena Swan activity. And Athena Swan is a sector-wide charter mark for higher education. It basically gives universities and academic departments a framework to measure how well they're doing around gender equality issues, and to sort of push them to reflect on how well they're doing or how poorly they're doing, and then develop an action plan to try and address some of those issues. So the University of Liverpool's been involved in Athena Swan since 2009. We currently hold a silver level award at the university, and you can achieve a bronze, silver or gold level award. So we've made some progress. There's still a long way to go, I think. I don't think we can ever be complacent, and I think it's always going to be, you know, a continual effort to keep moving forward, and also to not lose any ground that we've made. And I think the points that Lucy was making about the impact of COVID, I think that's being felt throughout society at different levels and in different types of impact. But that's something we've certainly been challenged by this year, and something that's sort of been a big part of my work for the last few months has been trying to respond to some of those challenges.
And I was just thinking about, if you, with your work in kind of at the academia, like academic sector, would you say that imposter syndrome is quite prevalent in academia? And for those who don't quite know, imposter syndrome is the sense of feeling like a fraud in a place usually where you are qualified enough to be in that area, but you feel like a fraud because you don't feel like you quite fit in. And this is especially prevalent amongst women and women of colour, especially not feeling like they quite deserve to be there, even though they may do. Sally, would you say this is common in universities and like academics?
Yeah, I definitely say it's really, really common. And I think imposter syndrome is a really interesting topic. I know that when I first came across it, I think I was at university quite a while ago, but and it was such a relief to find out about it, because I sort of always just assumed it was just me, you know, feeling like a bit of a fraud, a bit of a fake, that I didn't really deserve the, you know, the qualifications I'd got so far or any sort of achievements that I'd made. And when I found out about this, it was a bit of a light bulb moment to kind of think, oh, okay, so it's not just me, it's got a name, it's a common thing. And I think the other thing that's really interesting about it is, although it's seen as something that is more of an issue for women and something that's experienced more by women, I think when I've been reading up about it in the last few years, there's been a bit of a shift in the research, and they're actually finding that that men definitely experience imposter syndrome too, but it's perhaps that they respond to that feeling a bit differently, or because of societal pressures around masculinity and sort of how you perform masculinity in society, they maybe don't feel that they can be as open about those experiences as women can be. I think when I've talked to sort of colleagues, or when I've sort of done a bit of work around this, I think there's some things you need to sort of think about when dealing with imposter syndrome and trying to find solutions to it. And I think for women in STEM fields, so that's science, technology, engineering and maths, or sometimes with a double M on the end, so it includes medicine as well. I think it's important to consider experiences imposter syndrome alongside other barriers that women in those fields might face, because they're often the minority in the room. And I think that if you have imposter syndrome feelings, and then you look around the room that you're in and you're surrounded by men, or if you're a black woman or a disabled woman, you're surrounded by white men or non-disabled people, you can feel very lonely and isolated, and it sort of might compound those feelings of feeling a bit of fraud, a bit of a fake, and feeling like you don't deserve to be there. So that's why I think it's really important that we look at imposter syndrome, but we look at it in the bigger picture of sort of structural biases and individual biases and discrimination and things that people might be experiencing. Because I think there's a little bit of a danger if you focus on imposter syndrome too much, that puts quite a lot of responsibility on the individual to deal with those feelings and to maybe take all of that ownership of their own sort of progression in their career or their studies themselves, when actually there might be a whole host of other barriers that are impacting their ability or their feelings around how well they're doing. I think when we think about how to sort of provide suitable support for people dealing with imposter syndrome, I think that something that's really helped me has always been sort of peer support and finding sort of other sort of safe spaces to talk to others about those feelings and sort of find a bit of reassurance, that you're not alone in those issues, but also, a bit of a reinforcement of your own abilities and your skills. Having a bit of a sort of a cheerleader squad to support you is really important. And we've done a bit of work around that at the university. So we've set up a network for female early career researchers, because that's a group who, when we start to do a bit of focus groups and a bit of surveys, they were sort of telling us they felt quite isolated and felt, especially in STEM subject fields, that they were sort of struggling to find that peer support. And we've also got student groups that have been set up by students in some of our STEM departments. So students there have set up a Women in STEM Society, a Women in Physics group, and a Women in Maths group. And there's probably others as well that I'm not aware of. And I think that's really important, because it provides that that support and that peer support in particular to sort of reduce those feelings of isolation.
Oh, great. Thanks so much for that. I think that'll be really interesting for a lot of students as well, like just starting off at university and potentially feeling that imposter syndrome. So that's really useful. Let's move on to Sue. So Sue, like she said, she's from RASA. And I was just wondering if you could just explain for us just exactly what consent entails, because a lot of people like in society will kind of debate what actually consent means, especially in sexual situations. But if you'd just like to explain what the kind of your definition is and kind of what the definition should be, and everyone should kind of accept it as.
Yeah, I mean, so for me to go to a definition of consent within the terms of sexual activity, I went to Rape Crisis, so if you excuse me for reading something out, my eyes will just go across to read it. But the wording is just brilliant. And there's a lot of stuff on the Rape Crisis website that you can go to and get a breakdown further. But it says, consent happens when all people involved in a sexual activity agree to take part by choice. They also need to have the freedom and capacity to make that choice. So that really opens up, doesn't it, the sort of the struggles, as you said, that people might have around consent. The idea that, is it by choice? We know that people can be coerced within relationships, coerced, within marriages, to be able to, take part in sexual activity or take part in things they don't want to. Of course, if there isn't consent, then we're talking about sexual assaults, we're talking about rape, we're talking about sexual violence. So, I understand why people do struggle with consent. When you hear it like that, it feels really sort of straightforward, I guess, doesn't it? And it's like, if you've got the freedom and capacity to make that choice, but there's two or however many more people involved in those moments, and there's a potential that somebody may not seek consent. And so we're starting to look then at boundaries being very, very blurred. We're starting to look at people using their, asserting their control and power over another person, which is the same as what happens in domestic violence situations, of course, as well. And And, you know, with consent, the main thing I think is all around education. It really is all around education. So, you know, and this is for men, women and children. Like, as a service, we work with men, women and children, and we work with whoever has experienced sexual violence or abuse. But it's education for everyone. So, for example, with children, a lot of people may have had the experience where like a parent or a primary caregiver has said, oh, go and give your auntie so-and-so a kiss, and the child doesn't want to, but they sort of said, no, you know, go and give them a kiss, you know, and oh, that people pretend to cry, and then you have to go over and give someone a kiss. And it's, you're kind of looking at these behaviours from that sort of starting point and thinking, well, you know, it's early lessons that potentially our bodies are not our own. So if we're not able to fully embody our emotions, if our internal world is not recognised, meaning like, you know, we don't want to do something or we do want to do something. And obviously we've got safeguarding and parents having to keep children safe within this as well. But, you know, if our internal world is not recognised, it might be that we actually get to a point where we then can't recognise when the things that we want are the things that we want. And no, does no mean no then? Does no mean yes? Does no mean anything? What does no even mean? So I think as young as, you know, sort of children, really, this is a big area that we should be looking at in terms of consent. And I know things like the pants rule go into a lot of that. And then the sort of the framework that we're in society-wise, you know, in terms of how we respond to each other around consent. So, for example, 1987, there was a woman called Mary Simmerling, and she wrote a poem which was called What I Was Wearing, because that was the main thing that she was asked after she'd experienced sexual assault, was what were you wearing? And there was a big art exhibition that was created around that as well, which is fantastic. But, you know, look that up later. And actually, you know, from the service today, those are the same things that we will be saying to each other today. You know, and this will be friends that are women saying it to other women. This will be men saying it to women, men saying it to men, parents saying it to children. You know, what were you wearing? Why did you go out with them? Why did you go there? You know, didn't you know how much you were drinking? So the framework of expecting somebody who's experienced sexual violence to take on the sort of the real share of that responsibility is something that we really need to work on. And obviously a massive part of that is looking at what is consent. So somebody staying quiet is not consent. Somebody who, you know, has drank loads and just enjoyed themselves, or, you know, they've taken whatever and they feel like they're on another planet or whatever, you know, they're not necessarily going to be able to consent to what is going on. And consent really is about you know, sort of getting consent, asking for consent, communicating in the best way that you can, and getting that consent from that person. And if you can't get consent, then you don't do anything about it. And I think, you know, for me, the main thing comes back to us sort of reclaiming ourselves. So some of the work that can be done generally for ourselves is reclaiming our bodies and reclaiming our autonomy over ourselves, and, you know, sort of getting the confidence to assert what it is we want sexually and what it is we don't want. And those are things that are really important for us to look at in life. And that's not taking the responsibility away from a perpetrator, because for them it's power and control. So what they're asserting is their power and control over someone else. So you can have confidence from here to the moon, and it won't make that much difference if somebody decides to do something. But I do think that that's part of the journey, is like us reclaiming our own bodies for ourselves, knowing what it is that we want, and, you know, really being tough legally and socially on people that perpetrate this kind of behaviour, you know. So actually to back each other up, to say to each other, not what were you wearing or what were you drinking or why did you go there, but what did they do? What was it they were doing? What was their behaviour? What did they say? Who were they? Do we need to go to the police? You know, all of that behaviour, really. Yeah.
Thanks so much. That was really insightful, and I think a lot of people could use that, especially because I think a lot of people don't understand the kind of blurred lines in the sense of consent, stuff that usually you're told as as a young kid that's fine, but when you grow up you think think I didn't consent there, or people, the stuff that you've been growing up around doesn't necessarily mean it's right. I think that's it's all about introspection, and like you said, like reclaiming yourself, even though that can't obviously completely stop some of the stuff that happens. But yeah, like you said about reclaiming, I just wanted to ask, so Micaela, oh sorry, I'll ask this to Lucy actually, sorry. But Lucy, would you say that consent can be empowering, and would you have any tips of like reclaiming yourself and kind of as a woman reclaiming your rights?
So I was just thinking off the back of what Sue said, possibly the only benefit of this coronavirus, and the good thing that will come out of it, is people are reclaiming their bodies, but not in the way you might expect. So it's kind of promoting good ideas about consent, because children or anyone can be like, you're standing too close to me, you're not, you need to cover your hands, you need to cover your face, and it's giving people that kind of like autonomy over the bodies to what make them feel safe, and that can obviously be extended into any like sexual activity. In terms of can consent be empowering, it's a difficult question, because the likes of me, I found the sisterhood out the back of abuse and not really knowing where I fitted in as a woman or in anywhere really, and having that collective was a really good way of empowering myself, but also really getting to grips with what consent meant for me, what I found acceptable in the way that people treated me, what I was prepared to stand for. So in that sense it can be empowering, but in the sense in like other ways, so for the likes of people who with the draw the line, consent might be something that's very triggering. The concept of consent might be something that people find difficult, because if you're a victim of sexual violence, the power in saying no, and the power in kind of setting boundaries for yourself, that's something that can take years and years to come. That's, if anything, from my own experiences, the ability to consent and set boundaries is possibly the hardest thing to do in the wake of sexual violence. So, and as well, you're not born, like, especially as women, you're not born really with consent, because you have to go through something, most women do, to go through something incredibly traumatic to learn that you can't say no, and to learn that you don't have to do what other people are doing or what other people are telling you to do. It's you'd think it would be instinctive for a human being to say, I don't want to do that, I don't like that, but because of all these stupid kind of societal norms of pleasing men, or you don't want to be a bitch, it's like consent isn't something that's innate and it's not within you. And I think when you kind of break that cycle and you come full circle, that's what's empowering, when you learn that you've always had that power, you've always had that decision. I do think it can be empowering.
Yeah, I agree totally. And like you said about how it's hard to kind of develop those boundaries, and it's like so you said it's all kind of created in us from the day we're born, societal ideas that, and really underlies it, that women don't really have much consent, but it's hard breaking those boundaries and understanding that we do have consent and we are able to kind of say no. So we've discussed like a lot of topics there, and I just wanted to ask Micaela, is there any other issues that you think come up for women who are particularly students and in the academic world or just in student life, and do you think they differ between different backgrounds and women's different where they've come from? Do you think that differs in their experience as women?
So obviously I think like at uni, women like universally, like, and in society, have to like face loads of different things, obviously like day-to-day sexism, small things like women can't walk at home by themselves at night, etc., just like little things like that. But also like sexual assault, rape, sexual violence can have like a huge impact on a student who's just at uni to learn, to make friends, etc., move away from home, and it can have a huge effect on someone in terms of their mental health, their grades, and their, you know, their grades at uni, whether they want to stay at that particular uni. And I think that's something that probably needs to be discussed more, because I don't think it, you know, it's so wrong that this can happen to a student, a new student at uni, and you know, everything can be affected by it. Their grades can get affected by it, and that's really something that sticks with you like for your whole life. Obviously, the second part, these are the things that like obviously affect like women like universally, but in terms of like coming from different backgrounds, I'm obviously speaking from my experience like as a white woman. You know, Black women and women of colour have different experiences, or will have different experiences to myself, and obviously face, along with sexism, face racism. Also, you know, trans women as well, they all face misogyny, you know, misogyny from, you know, fellow peers, society, but also they'll face transphobia, which is something that I won't understand as a cis woman. You know, LGBT women, hypersexualization of lesbians and bisexual women as well, when they're out, is a huge problem, which, you know, different you know, straight women might not face. But also, as I think another big thing at university, from my experience, as a working class woman, I think that can I think our experiences are also different to middle class women at uni, often having to work alongside our studies quite a lot, compared to people maybe who might just get you know, support from their parents. Having to work alongside your studies as well adds extra pressure when you're trying to learn. So obviously that's a different experience, I guess, from women from different backgrounds. And obviously like imposter syndrome as well, like feeling like because you're from a working class background that you maybe don't deserve or shouldn't be at uni, and you can't really relate to a lot of people that you're on the same course with, because they come from, you know, different, like completely different backgrounds to you. So yeah, I think that's it, what I've got to say on that.
Thanks, Micaela. Yeah, I think it's also important to understand that, you know, not all women have the same experiences. There is no kind of homogenous experience. There's so many different backgrounds that women may come from, which can affect their experience, especially at university, coming from, you know, people coming from all over the country from different backgrounds and having different experiences. It can be quite challenging sometimes, but yeah. So and Sally, I was wondering, from your line of work, do you think women, like from what you've experienced, is like women will have different experiences based on their different backgrounds, and how do you like tend to see that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, sort of linking into what Micaela said, I think there's some sort of common experiences that I think most women probably have had, and that could be everything from sexual violence through to sort of experiencing like casual microaggressions and sort of more day-to-day sort of biases and the way that impacts on them. So I think there is some common ground, but I think, as you said, Micaela, I think there's a huge variation depending on you know, all sorts of identities and experiences and life stages, and how that might intersect with your gender identity too. You touched upon like sort of trans women's rights, but sort of in my role, we also I work a lot with women who are parents and carers, because from an academic career perspective, that's definitely something that seems to come up a lot for us, and something that does have a massive impact on women in that field. It's been particularly notable this year, I think, with the COVID pandemic and the impact that's had on women, particularly as carers and parents. Although obviously men are carers and parents as well, we still see that women take on the bulk of that responsibility and the bulk of that workload. And I suppose as a university, all we've been able to do so far is try and be as flexible as possible with our staff who are parents and carers, and offer them as much support in terms of flexibility as we can. I think thinking about other life experiences, Another one that we've been working on at the university in the last couple of years has been support for women and for people who are going through the menopause, which is obviously linked to age, but it's not always linked to age, because obviously women can experience menopause a lot earlier, or it can be brought about medically. And it's been quite a taboo subject, and I think it's only really been something in the last few years that that women have been able to feel a bit more comfortable about being open about. And obviously the symptoms of menopause can be quite sort of detrimental, and they can be quite impactful on your ability to work. So I think providing a bit of extra support and a bit of awareness raising and understanding around that's been really important. And I think sort of trying to break down some of those taboos. I know that the Guild has been doing a lot of work, and also a lot of student activists around the university around period poverty as well. And I think that's another sort of taboo subject area that it's really great that actually people are starting to talk about it, and actually doing loads of really good work to try and tackle it. I think another thing in my experience in terms of my role has been working, sort of linking back to my last response about imposter syndrome, about looking at groups that might be feeling quite isolated, and particularly when you think about women in STEM subject areas, that's often where they are the minority, and we need to do a lot of work, and I do a lot of work with departments in that area to try and tackle some of those issues around both increasing diversity, but also creating a more inclusive environment, so that women, when they do come here, are actually, they're supported to stay and actually want to stay, and they have a positive experience while they're there. So again, that's and I think those experiences again will be impacted by other parts of their identity and their life experiences. And I think Micaela's points about sort of class and socioeconomic status, I think, are really important points alongside everything else, because obviously that can have a massive impact. I think when I've talked to academic colleagues around issues around class and especially academics from working class backgrounds and women from working class backgrounds, that's definitely something they report as having an impact, and feeling they've got to try that extra bit harder to be accepted if they haven't got the same, you know, sort of common experiences as maybe people from middle class and upper class backgrounds in academia have, or if they've got a strong regional accent, that can also have quite an impact on them too.
Yeah, that sounds like great work that you do, you know, with the gender equality stuff. I think it can really help create a pathway for women in academia, just like reducing those boundaries. I wanted to ask a question for everyone to kind of tie it up a bit, to kind of bring it all together. Do you think you can find empowerment in activism, and is activism empowering? So, Sue, you mentioned you've done like activism in your personal life. Would you say that you find empowerment in activism, and or either way, is activism empowering?
Yeah, I would say that definitely. For a number of reasons personally, because the stuff that I would do is I would create pieces of artwork that were based on actually based on consent and lack of consent. And these would be pieces that I'd sort of like, you know, put around the city. And there was something quite liberating about being able to create something with a message and put it out there, and hopefully for it to make people think about what that message might be for them. So yeah, you know, creatively to be able to turn whatever, you know, the kind of material, the kind of trauma that I deal with, you know, every day at work, people's impacts of what they've experienced either in childhood or in adulthood, or possibly both, you know, for a lot of people both, to be able to turn that into something else that feels like it's in some way reflecting on their experience, but putting it out to a wider audience for them to think about it, and hopefully to maybe change some minds, you know. So actually to have people thinking about consent in a different way, or I don't know, just like being able to think about it at all, being able to start talk about it, you know, just to reflect on things, to be able to change the reality of society, feels very empowering to be able to do that. And with work as well, we try to go along to things like the Reclaim the Night and stuff like that, and we always try to go to those and have a, do a little 5 or 10 minute talk or whatever, and they're always really important to us as well, and the things that we really enjoy doing. So yeah, we just love it, get a buzz off it, but also there's something about getting into your own material, your own stuff around what's happening, and being able to create it into some other form, transform it out there, is very empowering. Yeah,
I definitely agree. Yeah. Micaela, as from a student perspective, and obviously the work you are aiming to do with your new society, do you find it empowering when you get involved in the activism? And also, would you recommend it to students who are just starting off here at University of Liverpool? And how would you recommend they get involved if they're interested in getting involved with activism with women's issues or any other social issues?
So I think activism can be really empowering. I definitely wouldn't have been in maybe 2 years ago in the right place to like set up a society like this, but obviously being able to like set it up and meet other people who want like the same have the same aims as you, and is really empowering as well. I think like a lot of the like supporting each other, I think at uni is really important, and supporting survivors. So we're hoping to do like peer support as well, so where like people can come and like feel comfortable to talk about to talk or not to talk about like what happened to them. So I think like that's actually can be really empowering for people. I think one thing that I found at uni is there not really being a place to be able to like feel comfortable to talk about it, and like a place where you can meet other people that have gone through like the same thing as you. So I think that's really important and quite empowering. I obviously think like a lot of the affecting change societies at uni, I definitely think students should join, and when we have our first event, like anyone should come along, like if they agree with like the aims of our society. But also like I think it'd be a good way also to meet like-minded people, but also like a lot of the affecting change societies would be really good in getting involved in, like if you want to campaign or get involved in like social issues as well. So I would just encourage people to join them as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really great way to kind of just get stuck into the local community and the university. And like you said, like find people who have had similar experiences. Lucy, would you agree that activism is empowering, and would you say, what would you suggest for potentially students who have just joined the university to do? Because I know the Liverpool Sisterhood is a collective kind of in the city more. So how would you suggest they get more involved in that activism in the city?
So for us as a group, activism's a double-edged sword, because we really do want to. Sorry, my cat's just about to walk on the keyboard. No. We really do like want to do the most to kind of promote Liverpool and Scouse women and Scouse power. But for us as feminists, it's difficult because the day or like the time for white feminism is it's over. There's issues like what RASA and what Micaela are doing that of course unify women, but we don't need to be talking about issues but predominantly affecting white women, because we've had that. That was the 60s and the 70s. Now is, and what we're really pushing for is the time for women of colour, trans women, and kind of amplifying their voices. So as a group, we've hosted reading groups that have focused on the work of predominantly women of colour. So that's where our activism's going, and that's what's empowering us as a group and me as a person. It's really not, it's changing kind of the conversation around and what we think of feminism, what we think of when we think of like the 60s and 70s, kind of moving away from that and what it means to be a feminist now in like 2020. We do have quite a lot of students in our group. obviously if you move into a new city, it's difficult because you're just finding your feet, and then obviously with us being based in Liverpool, it's very much focused on, you know, issues for Merseyside type of thing. The way I would recommend for students and just anyone in general is obviously come to our group if you want to if you want to make a difference for women in Liverpool. But also we work very closely with the Feminist Society for the university. We work with them on Reclaim the Night. We've done a lot of poster making, we've done loads of different things with them. So if you're kind of branching out and you want to meet like-minded people, I'll definitely like join the feminist talk, but also don't be afraid of joining us as well, because if you go home or if you move away again, you know, you'll always have that connection in Liverpool as well. So yeah, I think that's what I mean.
Yeah, I definitely agree about the whole kind of double-edged sword thing. It can sometimes be hard, especially in the feminist movement. There can be a lot of people who are mainly just for white women, which is a real big shit. And I think it's something internally as like in feminist groups that we have to work on and kind of make sure that what feminism means isn't what it used to mean potentially in the past, or how it at least was enacted on. And Sally, just on kind of like academia, how would you say that it is best to kind of empower yourself in academia, and what have you seen in women that you've worked with, like how you think that they've empowered themselves?
I think starting to answer that, I think linking into what sort of Lucy and Micaela have talked about, of sort of you do find that sense of community when you get involved in any of this type of work, and I think that's something that I've found has been fantastic in my role. I've met some amazing women and been really privileged to work with some amazing women and learn from them sort of along the path of this job. I think for any students who want to get involved in gender equality work at the university, there's obviously there's the student societies that are represented here, and there's some others at the Guild as well. But if you were interested in getting involved in work in your academic department, I think if you look on whichever your departmental intranet, there'll hopefully be an Athena Swan tab or some information about EDI work in the department. And you can contact that group. I think they'll always be looking for willing volunteers to help out with running events, or or even just to provide, you know, student perspective and student feedback for that area of work in the department. So if you are interested, definitely contact the departmental rep in your area and see if you can get involved in that way.
That's great, thank you. So just moving on to the Q&A segment of this panel, we've had some questions come in from Instagram, people in the meeting, and also prior to the meeting. So Sue, do you have any tips for looking after your own well-being whilst carrying out activism? And I think especially this is for like to do with sexual assault and misconduct. How would you suggest, you know, especially when stuff like that can be very triggering and sensitive, how would you suggest looking after your own well-being? Oh, I think we've lost her. I'll move on to someone else. So Sally, what could men do who work in your field to empower or support their female colleagues?
I think that's a really important point, and I think that's something that, especially in STEM subject areas, we're starting to talk about more and more, is what male allies can do, because it shouldn't be up to women, who are often the minority, to try and fix all of the problems in that area. When actually men are often in the sort of senior positions and hold perhaps a bit more power, so they've got far more ability to perhaps hold a bit more sway and to make some strong changes. I think from an individual perspective, I think it's often about making sure that your female colleagues and your female students are getting their voices heard. So it's about, you know, making sure that you're amplifying their voices if you're in meetings with them, making sure they get credit for their work, because that's often something, you know, that might get overlooked for their achievements, and so male allies can have a really positive individual impact by doing that. I think more collectively, it's about, especially for men who hold positions of power in a department or any sort of position of authority, looking at the structures within the department, looking at how transparent procedures are, how fairly workloads distributed. If it's for students, how are opportunities distributed to those students, and is there transparency there and a sort of an equal chance for everyone to get involved? So I think it's, yeah, an individual perspective. It's making sure you amplify and give credit to your female colleagues and your female students. I think from a sort of more structural perspective, it's taking a look at everything in that area, from student recruitment right the way through to staff recruitment, to promotion opportunities, and how you tackle each of those things and what you could do to make them better, more transparent, and make sure that everyone gets the same chances.
That's really useful, thanks. And also, Micaela, along the same lines, what do you think male students could do to empower their female peers, or at least, you know, kind of prevent the structures that are the kind of misogynistic structures that can occur in society?
So I think definitely, like, one thing that men need to do more is like call out themselves and their friends. Like if they see something, like obviously it shouldn't always be down to us to be like, that's not okay to say. And yeah, I think that they should probably take more of an active role in like calling out their friends. I think also like supporting our campaign, speaking to their friends about it, speaking to people about it is really important. I think supporting our campaign, but actually like not just like supporting it to like, I don't know, make themselves like look good, like actually supporting it, and living by like what, you know, what they're telling to people, and like but being very mindful that they're doing that. Yeah, I don't really know, like obviously just like supporting us and not like adding to everything, not adding to it.
Yeah, great. Sue, I think we lost you there for a bit. I don't know if you heard the question, but I'll ask you again. Do you have any tips for looking after kind of your own well-being when carrying out activism? And I think this especially applies to activism to do with sexual misconduct and assault and rape issues. So how would you suggest women look after their well-being during these types of activism?
Yeah, my connection's not very good, so if I go off or I start to go weird, then I'll try to keep going. But
Okay.
yeah, I think really it's about community. So people, you know, build within a group so that they can create whatever it is they need to create together. And, you know, feel that their voice is heard amongst other people, because that's really important to know that your voice is heard and acknowledged, and your internal world is really acknowledged as well, really important. And to know that if for you something's triggering, you know, even within, you know, creating something activism wise, if you knew that for you actually doing a particular piece of art or, you know, a particular message was really triggering for you, then that's okay for you to not get involved, because you have to look after yourself. So actually to be able to really, just know your own personal boundaries, because they are very, very individual, and, you know, not feel the pressure, but feel the love from your peers and your people in your group.
Great, thank you. And Lucy, so you mentioned with activism you're still learning. Would you say that to be a truly good ally, you must be open to continue your learning? Like, is there a moment where you have to stop learning, or is it something that you always have to continue doing? And also, just to add on, like, how would you say the best way to be a good ally, whether it's to do with people of colour, especially to do that Black Lives Matter movement, and also our trans sisters, how would you suggest to be a good ally?
Probably the first thing I'd suggest is don't just put a black square on Instagram and call it a day. I think it goes a lot more deeper than that. So to be a good ally, you need to listen, and you need to, kind of what I was saying before, you need to be quiet, and you just need to listen to what these communities are telling you. I think as well, something that it comes with the role of, you know, trying to empower people and trying to like create just a better world to live in. You are going to be criticised. You're not going to do everything perfectly, because no one will, and you're not, you know, no activist is perfect. That you make mistakes along the way, but you learn from them. And when people criticise a particular thing that you're doing and say, you know, this is actually quite offensive to our community, this isn't actually supporting us, listen to them. You know, don't just come back with a counter argument about why you're right and why they should listen to you, because that completely defeats the point. Mainly like Sue's question, but it's important to take care of yourself and to again, like Sue was saying, you know, you don't need to get involved with everything, but just also it's okay to turn the news off from time to time. It's okay to not check what's going on in the world, because you know, you can't be everywhere at once. You can't be helping every person as much as you possibly can. You know, you're not a god, so you can't be everywhere. So in terms of always learning as well, again, it kind of ties into that. It's okay to there's going to be things you're not going to know. There's going to be things you're going to have to read up on, and that is what has been a true ally. It's doing the work yourself. So if you're not particularly, you know, if you don't have a lot of experience with, you know, the experiences of women of colour, you know, especially Black women, don't then go to a Black Black woman on Instagram and just be like, yeah, so how can I help you? You know, how can I be an ally? Because that's, you're expecting emotional labour from people of colour who already have to do so much to just be heard every single day. So do the work yourself, educate yourself. Google is fantastic. Remember to practice self-care. Don't read everything, because you'll just get upset and you won't do anything. And always be there to listen and be open to criticism is probably what I'd say.
And also, just following on from that, it says here, someone's asked a question to you, Lucy, again about your experience as a woman influences your art, and would you consider this to be activism? And do you consider the art you make as part of your activism?
It's yes and no. I'm not very good at giving one answer, but it's in the sense that my art has been a form of therapy for me. So in a sense, it's just for me. It's a way for me to kind of come to terms with things I've been through, come to terms with the world I live in, because you know, there's a lot to process every single day, especially as a woman. You know, you do face difficult situations, and there's such a culture, especially with Instagram and different social media, of kind of monotonizing all of your hobbies and making a career out of things that you do. And especially within feminism, there's such a pressure to share everything, to share every moment that you're doing. Every kind of moment of activism needs to be documented, otherwise it doesn't count. So in a sense, it's for other people, and it is activism, because if you choose to share it, then you know there's a message that you want to put out there, and there's a message that you want others to get from the things that you make. But I think equally it's important to have outlets that are just for you, because as a woman, you're born and you grow up with so much trauma that you never really come to terms with until, you know, maybe you click on a Zoom meeting like this, or maybe you see a post on like Facebook about being a woman, and then it resonates how difficult it actually is. So I think it is definitely important to have something just for you. And that can still be activism. If it's not being seen, doesn't mean it's any less valid. You can still be an activist on your own in the confines of your own house. It's just that balance, I think. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And this is to everyone, so if you kind of just want to speak up if you have an answer to this. But so we talked about developing boundaries, and also I think Lucy mentioned it was breaking the cycle of people pleasing at the expense of kind of setting your own boundaries. Does anyone have any tips for doing this in the workplace, or especially academic setting, or even in the student kind of world, especially in the Freshers Week, where a lot of first years are moving into places with people that they don't know? Does anyone have any tips for kind of setting boundaries?
I can quickly say something. I think like
Yeah.
learning to say no to people, especially learning to say no to things that you're maybe not comfortable with, is really, really important, especially in like Freshers Week, especially when you come to uni. You might feel like you really need to please everyone, and go along with everything that your peers are doing. But I think being able to say no, and that's okay to say no, is really, really important. That was just like a little thing I wanted to say.
Great. And Sue, did you have anything to say about that, about developing boundaries and kind of breaking that cycle of people pleasing?
I think it's around sort of really trusting yourself. So that can take a while to get that. And obviously, if you're sort of in a new city and you're a student and you just, you're meeting new people, you might feel really vulnerable. So it's around, I think, initially being really kind to yourself. So being, really gentle with yourself, really kind to yourself as you're immersing yourself in, the university world. I'm really getting used to, like Micaela said, what saying no, like what does no mean for you? What is it that you are okay with, and what is it that you're not okay with, and sort of practicing in a way, sort of like practicing saying no with people that you're going to be able to do that with, and then work sort of further out from there to people that potentially maybe a bit more of a conflict.
I think there's kind of a common theme there as well, like kind of self-reflection and understanding what exactly consent does mean to you and what your boundaries are, because obviously you can't set your boundaries without understanding them. So yeah, I think that's really important. And another question for Sally was, so you talked about taboo subjects which affect women, and aside from the menopause and period poverty, do you think there's any other taboo topics that you think impact women, especially in the workplace, and how can we begin to kind of break these down?
Yeah, I definitely think there's still some, I don't think the taboos have finished around sort of periods and around menopause either. I think it's the conversation started, which I think is fantastic. And I think we're getting a bit more open around that. So that's really a real positive step. I think the first thing that sort of sprung to mind really about other taboo subjects is probably around sort of fertility in all of its spectrum. So everything from birth control, abortions, and managing your fertility in that way, IVF, people having miscarriages, and those things affect people when they're studying and also in the workplace too. And being pregnant as well. I think all of those things are probably still quite taboo subject areas. I think in terms of tackling them, I think the starting point, as it was with maybe period poverty and periods and menopause, is around sort of having that conversation and women realizing there's other women out there in the same boat and they can actually be open and have those conversations. And then I think the next step after that is then broadening the conversation to make sure that everyone's aware. And I think I've definitely seen with the work we've done around the menopause that the women who are in the peer support menopause group, they're now completely happy to go back to their department and talk to their male colleagues about it, talk to their young male colleagues about it who might get really flustered, but then they're just deal with it. I'm having a hot flush, I'm having the menopause, this is what's happening to me. And just trying to sort of be quite open and frank about it until it becomes normalized and actually everyone's like, actually it's not such a big deal, it's just part of having a female body and this is what female bodies sometimes do. So I think it's being open, normalizing the conversation as much as possible and providing support when it's needed.
Just I think as well, like, because this kind of applies to both like academic and like not academic, but because I've just graduated, so something that I'd probably say is don't be polite, like hold your doors open, say please and thank you, but especially to women, you don't need to be polite to men. So if he's saying, oh, can I buy you a drink, and you don't want to, just say no. You don't need to get his number because you feel sorry for him. You don't need to let him buy you the drink because you feel like, obviously there's a real issue of feeling scared for your safety, in which case obviously do take that into consideration. But even in like academic circles, in seminars, if I had £1 for every girl that I knew had an opinion but wasn't going to say in that seminar what she thought about this particular text or this particular topic. I'd just pay my student loans like then and then. But so don't be polite, you know, don't be afraid to assert yourself and really make your opinions heard and known, is probably, if I could tell any student, that would probably be it. And also, if you're struggling in anything's going wrong, please reach out to people, and please, because there are people there to help you. And definitely, that's what I'd probably say.
Yeah, that's great, and it's a really good point about the kind of assertion. And I think a lot of, as women, we all would realise that, you know, you spend a lot of time apologising for stuff, like especially in settings where you're not quite comfortable. You're kind of like, oh, sorry for having an opinion, and then you're like, well, actually, wait a minute, you know, a man just said that as like to the like next to me, and he said it without apologising, and he was very confident in it. So I think, you know, kind of understanding that we don't have to apologise for being kind of headstrong and having an opinion, and even if it's a wrong opinion or you know, said incoherently, at least you're putting yourself forward, and you have every right to kind of speak out, obviously, unless it hurts other people. And kind of finally, just like to go round, and it's kind of just similar to what we've all been talking about, but is there, Micaela, if you just like to start off, is there one piece of advice you would give to a woman in empowering herself, and kind of especially with, if you're a new student starting off at university, or you're returning after 6 months of 6 months of COVID still continuing, what was that one piece of advice you would give to a woman trying to empower herself?
One thing I would say is just like speak loud and like make yourself heard, because we need to stop like apologizing for having an opinion, as you said before, or like being quiet and not saying our opinion because we're worried about what other people are going to think. But men do it all the time, so we probably should do it as well.
Thank you. And Sally, do you have one piece of advice for a woman trying to empower herself?
I think linking into what Micaela said, I think it's thinking about, if you're feeling imposter syndrome feelings and you're worried about who you're trying to impress and whose approval you're seeking, I think taking that time to have a bit of self-reflection around, why are you seeking their approval? Is their approval actually worth it, and is it actually going to make any difference to your life? Because you might end up wasting a lot of your time trying to get approval from people who might never give it, and actually in the end of the day it doesn't really matter. So I think it's reflecting on whose approval you're looking for and why, and you know, can you live without it?
And Sue, do you have any one piece of advice to give to a woman who's empowering herself?
It feels very similar to what everyone else has just said, but it's about not second guessing what other people think or want from you, but actually staying with that real individual sense of yourself and what you want to do, where you want to go, what is it you want to do with your life. Yeah, just sticking with who you are as an individual.
Great. And finally, Lucy, do you have one piece of advice for a woman who wants to empower herself?
Wear the red lipstick, cut your hair, stop thinking about what other people think. Yeah, exist for yourself and do things for yourself because you want to do them. You're not there to make everyone, you're not there to look like a nice piece of furniture, you know, you're there to be heard and just do the things. Because I know that there'll be women watching this where there's something, they want to wear lipstick, they want to cut their hair, there's something that they really want to do but they're not doing it because they're scared what other people think. So just do the thing. That would be.
That's great, thank you. That's a really nice note to end on. I'd just like to say thanks so much for the panelists for coming, and thanks Imogen and Kish from the Guilds for facilitating, and thank you for the attendees for coming. Because there were sensitive issues brought up, I'd like to repeat that the Guild Advice Service email is in the chat. And it's guildadvice@liverpool.ac. So if you have any concerns or you need support, and that's just in general university life as well. If you ever need support from the guild, they are there for you. So yeah, thank you. Have a good evening.